Good morning. So glad you guys are here, whether that's in person or online. I recognize some of you guys from last night. This weekend is a special weekend. It's a Pacific U weekend. Many of you guys probably already know this, but this year our church started a new program where once a quarter we have a visiting scholar come and give a series of talks. And this quarter it's Cliff Goldstein. He's the editor of our quarterly, the adult Sabbath School Bible Study Guide. And he's also written many books, speaking of which he has a new one that's coming out this year with Pacific Press, and they were excited that he was going to be here this weekend. So they actually gave us some books, kind of an early release. So they're out in the foyer. They were very generous, gave us lots of books. So you guys can take one for yourself and take one to give to a friend. Last night Cliff spoke and gave his personal testimony. If you missed it, it's online on YouTube and Facebook. And today he's going to be talking about faith and science. So with that, please bow your heads and we'll get started. Dear Heavenly Father, loving Father, thank you for today. The smoke is gone, the sun is here, and we're here to worship you. And today we're talking about a big topic, faith and science, and please just bless us as we dive in. I mean, there's things we understand like trees and gravity, but there's so much that we don't even begin to comprehend. Dark matter, what is that? Infinity, our personal non-existence. There's so much that we can't even begin to comprehend, let alone what we try to comprehend. So just please bless Cliff as he's sharing, and please bless us as we're here to listen and learn and discuss. Just please give us ears that we may hear and a heart and mind that we may not only grow in knowledge, but wisdom of you. Amen.
Okay, thank you. As the editor of the Bible Study Guide, I'm supposed to be teaching the lesson. But you don't tell my masters back at the GC, I won't either. So, I am anti-evolution. Fervently anti-evolution. And when I say that, you got to realize what I'm saying. I'm saying, and I realize what I'm saying, I'm saying that I believe that the thousands and thousands of some of the world's smartest and most educated people, thousands and thousands of the experts in biology, in genetics, in chemistry, in physics, in paleontology, in medicine. I mean, the PhDs, the postdocs, just the undeniable experts, and the Nobel laureates. That the vast, I mean, probably 99.9, well, I guess 99.9, some smart aleck mathematician will get me on that one. 99.7% of them, if not all of them, they're not only wrong about origins, they're radically wrong. And it doesn't bother me anymore. And I'm going to talk a little about why it doesn't bother me anymore. Because it's not going to be the first time that the vast majority of the world's intellectuals have been wrong. Now let me give you, suppose, and this is a total hypothetical situation. Suppose it came down that there were only two possible options for origins. There was what the thousands and thousands of experts claim, and they claim overwhelming scientific evidence for it in every field: chemistry, biology, geology, They claim overwhelming scientific evidence for billions of years of evolution. It's either had to be that, or life had to have been created by the flying spaghetti monster. That was Richard Dawkins, atheist Richard Dawkins, mocking of religion and Yahweh. If it had to be one or the other, I'd go for the flying spaghetti monster. I think there'd be better chance of that being the truth than evolution being the explanation for life on earth. But people say, but it's science. It's science. But I want to say, suppose the science is wrong. Now, one caveat before I begin. Being anti-evolution no more makes me anti-science than being against praying to a statue of Mary makes me anti-prayer. I want to make that clear right now. There is a role for science, a powerful, amazing role. It's amazing what science has done and can do. But then it's also, there are many things that science cannot do that people think, well, because science says it can do it, it does it. And we'll look at that. Now, this is important because the moment you're labeled anti-science, and I have been attacked for that, you're deemed, 3 levels lower than an imbecile. I have been attacked. I once wrote a column in the Adventist Review called Confessions of a Science Denier. Now, this is a bit ironic because, to this day, there is no set definition of what science is. In the philosophy of science, it's called the demarcation problem. I mean, what is the difference between good science and bad science and false science and pseudoscience? It's amazing, but even to this day, there's no set definition that everybody's satisfied with. And it's funny that things that in one generation were deemed the height, the epitome of good science, are a generation or two later deemed in the same class as voodoo. And let me ask you, I'm old enough to remember the tobacco companies which had PhDs working for them, PhDs in biology and chemistry, and who claimed that there was no definitive evidence, scientific evidence that smoking is bad for you. Now, were these guys doing science? Were they doing pseudoscience? Was it false science? What about to this day the meat industry? They've got bona fide PhDs with peer-reviewed scientific papers, all telling you how good meat eating is for you, and dairy industry. All sorts of scientific studies backed up by reputable PhDs, peer-reviewed papers, on and on and on, all scientific studies, and all claiming all these things are good for you, or the evidence is. I heard a guy on the radio one time, he was talking working for the dairy industry. He had been the Secretary of Agriculture, and now the dairy industry had hired him, and I'm sure they paid him a lot of good money. And he was going around insisting on all the scientific studies, and I tried to call in because I could guarantee you, if you look behind who funded those studies, there's a joke saying if you want to know the outcome of a scientific study, find out who's sponsoring it. And it's unfortunate, there's an awful lot of truth to that. And I was going to call up, I tried to get C-SPAN radio. I've gotten on C-SPAN radio before and early in the morning, and I've had friends for other parts of the country, the West Coast, say, I got up early in the morning, turned on the radio, and there was Cliff Goldstein on C-SPAN. But I wanted to call this guy up and say, sure, I get it. What possibly could be bad about cow's milk? I mean, what possible deleterious health effects could have drinking a fluid that causes a baby calf to gain 400 pounds in a year? How could that possibly have any bad health effects on human beings? See, right now, and again, if you want to eat meat, eat dairy, you can't believe what I had for breakfast this morning in this hotel. Okay? I had, oh my goodness, everything I normally never eat. So it's not being fanatical about it, but anyway. I'm reading a book, or I just finished reading a book, but written by a guy who's probably an atheist. And he's certainly not a creationist. He puts creationists in with flat earthers. And I talked to a friend of mine on the phone the other day who was starting to, he said, I never really gave the flat earth stuff serious consideration. I thought one time, I have an online column in the Review, and I thought one time I was going to try to make a point how you could find scientific evidence for any view you want. And you could get seemingly convincing scientific evidence. And I was going to write a spoof showing all the evidence for a flat earth, like a satire or a spoof. But I've learned in my 40 years as an Adventist, Adventists don't do satire and spoofs well. I would have been crucified over it. But I wanted to do it to show you could take some of the most ludicrous, idiotic, asinine stuff, and you could get tons of peer-reviewed scientific evidence to back it up. But anyway, this book I just finished reading, called Science Fictions: How Fraud, Bias, Negligence, and Hype Undermine the Search for Truth. And it was really a fascinating read. And I'm blown away, even though knowing what I known, I should have known for it. See, it's very funny. Part of undermine the search for truth. Now that's very interesting. I wrote a book, came out a year or two ago, and nobody reads it anymore. Probably none of you ever even heard of it. Baptizing the Devil, Evolution and the Seduction of Christianity. I don't even want to know how many of you read it, because probably none of you read it, much less heard of it. I just look at my royalty checks, and but I don't care. I write the stuff. I got to do it for myself as well. But I wrote this book, and as I was writing it, I spent 5 years, 3.5 years reading the philosophy of science, researching it, and then 1.5 years writing it. And as I was writing it, I gave it to a scientist friend of mine. And I said, Bobby, anytime you see anything I've got wrong that you think is wrong, mark it. And he sent me the manuscript back, and there were a number of big red circles. And anywhere where I implied that science was a search for truth, he marked big circles and he said to me, any honest scientist will tell you science is not about seeking truth. And now I don't necessarily agree. See, this gets into a whole on the philosophy of science. Is science about seeking truth? Some people say no, all science is about finding models and making predictions and understanding enough about the natural world to be able to control it. The idea of looking for truth, and I'll show you, they think is mythological, it's metaphysics. And I don't necessarily buy into it to the degree my friend did, but at the same time, there's some good reasons for not thinking science is a search for truth. Okay? But again, the great deception. You know, we laugh. We laugh at the myths that people in previous generations believed. We laugh at that. And what? You think we're the only era in history, in all of human history, that doesn't believe in myths? But you say, no, we don't believe in myths anymore because now we have science, and that teaches you truth. But I believe the great myth of our time is the myth that, well, if it's science, therefore it's got to be true. And that, I believe, is the great meta-myth of our era. And because, again, too, you get in a debate with someone, and all they got to do is say, but it's science. It's science. And the whole point is, and you have to kowtow before it because they say it's science, and that has become the epistemological, the king. At the moment they say it's science, you have to bow down and kowtow before it. And let me be blunt, okay? I'll just say it, and you could disagree. That's fine, you know. If what science teaches, and if all this overwhelming scientific evidence that they claim, overwhelming evidence in every field of biology, the overwhelming scientific evidence, if what they say is true about origins, then every single thing we believe about our faith is a lie from the ground up. Okay, and I'm not going to get into all that today, point by point, but it's, you know, Jesus is a fraud, the cross is a waste of time, and your hope of eternal life is a myth. That's how important the issues are. Now, those of you who heard my conversion story last night said I went to bed, a regular guy. I mean, I woke up in the morning, just in the world. By the time I went to bed that night, I was a born-again believer. I mean, overnight, it was really very, very strange experience for me. To go along, it was right before my 24th birthday. And then overnight, I realized that some of the most foundational beliefs that I had for my whole life were wrong. I mean, I'm talking at a foundational level. It's like your whole life you believe 2 + 2 = 5. And then suddenly realize it's 4. Your whole life you believe in a flat earth. And then suddenly realize it's round. That's at the most fundamental level. I have the most basic things I believed. And I was very easily able to just, say easily, I was okay with everything. But it was fascinating too, because I had been raised on evolution. raised on it from as far as I can remember. And I went to secular schools my whole life, public schools, University of Florida. And I don't ever remember one time ever evolution ever being questioned. It was just assumed to be true. I can still remember the 9th grade, Nautilus Junior High. It's so funny. I found out about 10, 12 years ago, Nautilus Junior High in Miami Beach, Doug Batchelor and I were in that junior high school at the same time in Miami Beach. I said, Doug, you wore your hair different back then. I didn't remember you. But I can still remember in the 9th grade, I thought I was hot stuff because I knew what ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny is. Do you even know what that is? Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. It's this idea promoted by a Darwin acolyte in like 1908 that a human embryo goes through the stages of evolution. It's got gills and fins and so on. I mean, this thing had been proven a fraud 100 years ago. Okay, even, bona fide evolutionists mock it. Okay, and yet here I was in the 9th grade in the late 1960s being taught this as a fact. Okay, well, but anyway, the bottom line was I never questioned it. And see, the issue, it's not so much that I was taught evolution, but I was taught it as an absolute fact. It wasn't questioned. You never gave it a second thought. Everybody knew it was true, and that was it. Well, then I'm a born-again believer, Gainesville. And I can remember, and this is kind of funny, because I'm telling you folks, I knew nothing. I just met God that night, was born again. I told you, if you would have told me that night I was a sinner, it was just not a concept that I understood. But it was fascinating because even in this stage, I sensed this irreconcilable conflict with my newfound faith and evolution. And I'd go to the people in the health food store, the Adventists in the health food store, and they were almost just brushing me off. Oh, come on, but then finally it's like, no, I got to deal with this. And I remember they gave me some creationist literature to read. And I read it, and I kind of, whether it was true or not, I don't know. Whether it was good or not, I don't know. But it was like the scales fell off my eyes. And I'm going to touch on this a little more. No one's going to deny the bones in the ground. The bones are there. But it was the first time in my life I was ever confronted with the fact that there might be other ways to interpret it other than evolution. And it was like, whoa, that's all I needed to understand. It was there, but there's other ways, and this actually leads to a fundamental problem with all of science. And I want to give you an example. of how this works. Remember the movie, I'm sure most of you have seen, whatever, Apollo 13? And those of us, we remember it. The spacecraft is flying and it blows up. And, it's so typical American. Their aircraft is 150,000 miles out in space and it blows up. Explosion. And Lowell says, Houston, we have a problem. This typical American pragmatism. And they had to try to figure out how to get it back. And there was this great scene in the movie where they got a chalkboard and they got a picture of the Earth. They got just a circle for the Earth, a circle for the moon, and they've got the trajectory of the spacecraft. And they decide they're going to do how they going to do it. And then they decide what they're going to do is they're going to let the spacecraft go around the moon, and based on Newtonian physics, they're going to let the gravity of the moon kind of catapult the spacecraft back to the Earth. Okay? And the thing is, they did it, and you know what? It worked. It worked. I mean, they could have, if they were using pure Newtonian physics, if they could have somehow conjured up Newton, stuck him in a room, given him a few figures and a piece of paper and a pencil, in 10 minutes, Newton could have told them what to do. Okay? And they did it, and they got the spacecraft back based on Newtonian physics. I mean, after all, when you look at something like that, how can you deny? How can you deny the success of science? How can you deny the truthfulness of science? You got a powerful, real-time, real-life example. Well, it's a little more complicated than that. First of all, Isaac Newton had absolutely no idea what gravity was or how it worked. When asked what it was, he says, hypothesin non fingo. I feign no hypotheses. In fact, he even called the idea of a force going through empty space and reaching out and pulling on something else. He said it was so utterly absurd. He goes, I have no idea why anybody in their right mind would believe it. Okay? This is Newton talking about his own theory. Okay? He had no idea what it was. Only thing he knew is that it happened. Secondly, Newton built his whole theory based on concepts of absolute space and absolute time. I'm not going to try to get into all that now. The point is, today, no scientist believes in absolute space and absolute time. Okay? So he had no idea what gravity was. He built it on two assumptions that are now believed utterly wrong. And then the bottom line was, in the early 20th century, Albert Einstein came by with general relativity and completely overthrew Newton's theory. Okay? Overthrew Newton's theory. I said to someone once, a physicist, I said, they say that Einstein said Newton was wrong. Isn't that a little overstated? And he said, no, Einstein showed Newton was wrong. So now, let me ask you a question here. Okay? He had no clue what gravity was. He built his theory on false premises. And the theory in the end turned out wrong. Okay? Now, this is finding truth. Okay? This is finding truth. You see, all the theory did was make predictions. And for some people, they say that's all science could do, is make predictions. The moment you start trying to say it's finding truth, you're winding up in a netherworld where you're bound to end up crashing and burning. But if you think science is more than that, if you think it is finding truth, then Newton's theory, no matter how successful, was highly, highly inadequate. All it did was tell us why something happens, it tells us what happens, but not why. He had no idea. And the point is, this remains to this day a fundamental battle in the philosophy of science. Does science teach us truth? And you think about it too. They're arguing over something like gravity here and now. And we're supposed to dogmatically fall down and accept when they talk about something that supposedly happened 800 million years ago, a genetic mutation. Now, I bring this up just to show you that things aren't as clear-cut and dry as you think. Let me give you another example. For thousands of years, people believed that the earth stood immobile at the center of the universe, and all the planets and stars circled the earth in perfect circular orbits at constant speeds. Okay? And you know what? For 1,500 years, this theory, wrong in every particular. We know the earth does not sit immobile. We know the earth does not sit immobile at the center of the universe. We know the planets don't orbit the earth, in perfect circles or at constant speeds. In other words, a theory that was wrong in every particular. But guess what? For 1,500 years, if you wanted to use that theory to sail your boat from, say, Lisbon, Portugal, to Genoa, Italy, you could do it. It worked perfectly. If you wanted to use that theory to predict where Venus was going to be in the sky in 6 months, you could, using that theory, a theory that was wrong in every particular, you could make it work. Now, again, was this seeking truth? Or was this just using a model and making predictions, and those predictions turned out true? Okay, as we know, we don't sit immobile. We're orbiting on our axis, and we're going around the sun, and the sun's going around the galaxy, and okay? That's what we're doing. And yet our senses completely deceive us. This is basically, anyway, the bottom line was, you have interpretations. You've got the phenomena, but how you interpret it, that's the whole question. Let me give you another example. Suppose I have a theory. My theory, I'm going to wad this up because we're going to do a scientific experiment. Okay. I have a theory X. And according to my theory, every time you do X, Y is going to happen. Doesn't matter what it is. My theory X says Y is going to happen. So, one of the things in science is called replication. You do an experiment, and I do my experiment X, and Y happens. And so you'll get it published in a journal, and some other scientist says, well, I'm going to try that. So some scientist in France does theory X, and Y happens exactly according to theory X. And then somebody in Russia says, all right, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do theory X, and according to theory X, Y is supposed to happen. And Y happens. And over and over and over again, based on my theory X, Y happens. What then is, of course, the logical conclusion about theory X? That theory X is true, right? Isn't that what you say the logical conclusion, right? No. It has absolutely nothing to do with it. Okay? There's absolutely no concrete evidence that your theory is true. Okay? All you've done is shown that it's not false, okay? Or you haven't falsified it. Let me give you an example. Okay, I have my theory X. And my theory X is that invisible spiders from Mars come to the earth and push everything to the ground. Okay? Now, if my theory X is true about invisible spiders from Mars pushing everything to the ground, then according to my theory X, if X is true, if I let go of this, it's going to fall to the ground. Whoa! Whoa! I just have scientific collaboration that my theory is true, right? Right? Can you see the point here? Now, this is a silly example, but again, for 1,500 years, something similar. They had this whole theory about the galaxy and the earth, and it turned out wrong. And yet they still were able to make predictions. Now, I bring this up because one of the things that we struggle with when you, for example, like me, don't believe in evolution is people say, but look at all the success of science. Look at all the success. Well, you can't deny that. I'd have a son who'd probably be dead today if it weren't for some of the things done in science. How many of us here in medical science, we marvel at the technology created by science. But the fact that the science works and the fact that you can make accurate predictions is a completely different thing from whether the theory behind the science is true. Okay? This is a point. A lot of people, wow, the science works, the atom bombs go off and all this stuff and so on and so forth. Therefore, it's got to be true. No, that's a total separate issue from the fact that whether it's true or not, the fact that it works. These are just interpretations. My invisible spiders from Mars, here's the phenomena. Things fall to the ground. The fact is, you can have an almost infinite number of theories to explain why it goes to the ground. There was one of the most famous philosophers of science in the 20th century. His name was Karl Popper. Very influential. And you know what Popper said was the odds of you being able to absolutely prove your scientific theory true? He's not saying whether it was true, but the odds of you being able to prove it true, he said they're absolutely zero. Zero that you could prove it true. Doesn't mean it's not true. Doesn't mean you don't have a whole lot of evidence for it, but zero to prove. Now, I'm not even saying I necessarily buy that. I'm bringing this up to show that this whole idea, well, the science works, and therefore it's got to be true, and so on and so forth. And again, I'll never forget when I read that creation book, and I have no idea if that creationist book was good or not. There could be some pretty wacky creationist stuff out there, as long as there's some wacky bona fide evolution stuff. You know what the evolutions, you know what some of the stuff they teach us? And don't laugh, they have scientific evidence for it. Some of them believe that that 80 million years or 100 million years ago, monkeys from Africa built rafts and took the rafts across to South America. Because according to their theory, the continents broke like 800 million years ago, and these monkeys diverged 200 million years ago. But the problem is you got these monkeys in Africa, and they can't be there according to the theory. So instead of, maybe our theory is wrong, they speculate that the monkeys rafted across the Atlantic Ocean. And I guess it'd have to be a male and a female. At least one male and female. Somehow they had to make... Don't laugh, folks. It's science. And how dare you mock and laugh science? The science that gets us to the moon, the science that builds our devices, all this stuff, the science works. And then the other one, the one I love too, is they theorize that in the beginning, human ears were used for breathing. We used to breathe through our ears, and then somewhere along the evolutionary chain. And then the other one, my favorite, was whales used to have hind legs. And I forgot what it was. They came to land, and they walked on their legs, and then eventually they went back to the water, and they lost their legs, and the legs evolved away. But folks, this is science. And for you to challenge science, you have to be an imbecile. As I said, I spent 5 years working on baptizing the devil, and that so freed me from this. Now then, too, think about this for a minute. Think about this, and I'm running out of time here. And I want you to look at something else here. Okay, we did the invisible spiders from Mars. What do you do just because a theory, okay, I'm trying to make the point, just because a theory works doesn't make it true. You know, right now, two of the most, quote, proven, I should say two of the most successful scientific theories are general relativity. Our GPSs all use general relativity. They get you right up, it doesn't quite work. You can use your GPS, you go 800 miles, and the last 50 yards gets off, but that's still pretty good. General relativity and quantum theory. Our cell phones all use quantum theories. All our radios all use quantum theories. They have been verified over and over. They say quantum theory works with accuracy that they've compared it to a human hair in contrast to the size of the continental United States. Okay? That's pretty accurate, very successful. And yet I want to read you something from a physicist named Brian Greene. He wrote a book called The Elegant Universe. And he says these two theories are, quote, almost unimaginable accuracy in virtually all predictions made by these theories. But then he says, as they are currently formulated, general relativity and quantum theory cannot both be right. The two theories underlying the tremendous progress of physics during the last 100 years are mutually incompatible. See, they work. They make accurate predictions. Like I said, our GPSs use one, our cell phones, all that. The science works wonderfully. And yet they're mutually incompatible. Well, if you think that all science is for making predictions and making technology, then who cares? Who cares? It doesn't matter which one is true or not. Okay? And there are a lot of scientists that say, don't bother me with that. That's philosophy. That's metaphysics. I mean, you go to the doctor and you give them a pill. Okay? And the pill cures the disease. Do you have to know everything, the underlying stuff and how it works? In most cases, I don't think they probably do. Maybe at a certain level, all they know is you take it, it works, it makes you better. Your side effects might cause your liver to rot, and all the rest. But the bottom line is it cures the immediate thing. So the fact that the theories work, and all I want to do is, the point I want to make, and I'm running out of time here, is we are bedeviled by the successes of science. We can't deny that. But again, and I'm hammering this point, the fact that a theory is successful, the fact that you can make accurate predictions, the fact I might have been able to build some fantastic technology based on my theory that spiders from Mars push things to the ground. I might have been able to create a widget and build. In fact, it was very interesting. They had all this scientific revolution, the end of the 1800s. They were creating all this technology based on these scientific theories. And then at the turn of the century, there was a whole revolution with relativity and quantum theory, and they were saying to these people, oh, by the way, hate to tell you, but that theory that you use to build your widget that you've become a billionaire over, hate to tell you, we now don't believe in the theory anymore. Well, you think the guy who built the widget cares? He doesn't care. Hey, the widget works. I don't care whether the theory's right or wrong. And this is Again, it's called the underdetermination of theory by evidence. And it is still an unsolved problem with philosophy of science today. Because you have no idea, whatever theory you've got, no matter how well it works, you have no idea if in 50 years or 100 years, somebody's going to come by and overturn the theory with a better theory. But on the other hand, some people, they don't care. It doesn't matter if the theory's correct. All that matters is that it makes accurate predictions. And so, again, and so I want you to keep this in mind. We're going to come back. We're going to look at this. We're going to look at this a little more this afternoon. But I want you to think about this point when I close. Because it fits in with everything what I'm trying to say here. Scientists could look through. All right, I'll give you a real life example. I'm old enough to remember. I think it was 50 years ago. I think Time magazine had a cover article how the latest and greatest science has shown saturated fat is bad for you. Okay? That's science. Saturated fat is bad for you. And then, what was it, 5 years ago? Time magazine had a cover article. Suddenly turns out, according to the latest and greatest science, saturated fat might not be so bad for you after all. Now, what changed over 50 years? Saturated fat? Human arteries, the human cardiovascular system, or the scientists? The scientists changed. You see what I'm saying here? 50 years ago, science said, and now they said it. But now, here's my point. They can take, I don't know how they do it, they can take saturated fat, they could stick it in a microscope, and they can bombard it with x-rays, they can do PET scans on it, they can dissect it, they can do this, that, they can do 1,000 different things right here in the present. And they're going to disagree over what they see, what it means, the implications are, and so forth. This is over something here and now. And yet we're supposed to bow down and genuflect before science when they say 800 million years ago, because none of them were around, 800 million years ago, some microscopic gene mutated and it caused X to happen and Y to happen and Z to happen. And some scientists in some lab somewhere will make that statement, and the next thing you know, it's all over the news, new evolutionary theory, on and on and on. And the masses buy into it. As I said, every age lives with its myths. And our age is no different. We have our myths as well. And I think the greatest myth of our age is, because it's science. It's not a myth. It's science. And therefore, it's got to be true. And in the end, folks, if you believe the Bible, you believe the creation story, then science has not only got origins wrong, it's got them radically, radically, radically wrong. And as I said, it doesn't bother me at all. I have absolutely no problem believing that it's got it wrong. Anyway, we'll pick up on some of that more this afternoon, and I'm going to go a little shorter in the afternoon because I want to leave it open for questions. And please, I don't like audiences where all they do is rah, rah, rah me. If you think I'm full of it, if you want to challenge me, challenge me. Okay? I mean, I hope there's some atheist evolutionist out here or somebody out here, and you want to go after me, go after me. Let's look. I'm not afraid to dialogue about these things. I'm not afraid. The bottom line is I just want to show people. And I'll end this last point. When I wrote Baptizing the Devil, as I said, I spent 3.5 years reading nothing but philosophy of science. And I could say 95% of the books I read on the people whom I learned all this stuff from, probably 95% of them were atheists. Well, all were evolutionists. And probably most of them were atheists as well. Which is because, see, they understand the problems that are there. They just don't want to let the general public know what the problems are. Anyway, let me just close with a prayer. Okay. Father, I thank you for your word, and I just pray you'll give us the faith to cling to your word. And there's so many forces out there pushing in so many different directions. And may we just cling to your word in faith, knowing, though, that we have very, very good reasons for trusting in your word over the words of men. And may we always remember that science is, in the end, the word of men. I thank you for your truths. In Jesus' name, amen. Very